Despite rising tensions and recent setbacks in direct communication between Iran and the United States continues, signaling that the door to nuclear negotiations remains open. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed that messages are still being exchanged through intermediaries, maintaining a fragile thread of dialogue amid growing mistrust. He also noted ongoing contact with European powers, though relations have deteriorated after the UK, France and Germany triggered the snapback sanctions mechanism. Meanwhile, Tehran is signaling renewed cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, and the Iranian officials say they are very close to finalizing a new engagement framework following months of suspended ties after Israeli and US strikes on nuclear sites. Taken together, these quiet exchanges suggest that nuclear diplomacy, while battered, is not yet buried. So, can nuclear negotiations be revived, or will the deadlock only deepen? And that will be our discussion today on In Depth, and do stay tuned. Despite rising tensions, Iran announced that it is ready to resume stalled nuclear talks with the United States, but only under new conditions shaped by its recent 12-day war with Israel. In a recent statement, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed that indirect communication with Washington is ongoing through intermediaries and that talks will only resume when the U.S. is ready to engage based on shared interests. He emphasized that any future negotiations with Washington must be based on mutual respect and include the lifting of sanctions. Araghchi further stressed that while negotiations remain on the agenda, they must take on a new shape and different dimensions. Meanwhile, Tehran noted progress in discussions with the IAEA, saying both sides are close to finalizing a new cooperation framework. New meetings with the agency are set to take place in Vienna to restore ties suspended earlier.
As tensions persist, indirect communication between Iran and the United States over Tehran's nuclear program continues. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi recently confirmed that messages are still being exchanged through intermediaries, signaling that the door to diplomacy remains open. Araghchi stated that Iran is willing to resume negotiations, but only if the United States agrees to engage based on mutual respect and shared national interests. He made it clear that Tehran will not return to the table under the same conditions that existed prior to the June war with Israel. Strains have also deepened between Iran and European powers after the United Kingdom, France, and Germany activated the snapback mechanism under UN Security Council Resolution 2231, seeking to reinstate international sanctions. Araghchi called the move a major mistake, arguing it has further complicated efforts to reach a diplomatic resolution, though talks with European nations are reportedly still ongoing. Meanwhile, Iran says it is very close to finalizing a new framework for cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, following its earlier suspension of engagement after Israeli and U.S. airstrikes on its nuclear facilities. Although the path ahead remains uncertain, the continuation of indirect dialogue and the potential for renewed collaboration with international bodies suggests that nuclear diplomacy is not entirely off the table. So, what lies ahead for nuclear negotiations? And will quiet diplomacy be enough to break the deadlock?
And delving more into this, joining us from Washington is Dr. Fadi Hilani, a senior fellow of the National Council on the U.S.-Arab Relations. And from Cairo is Mr. Hani Sulaiman, the Iranian affairs expert. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining me here today at In Depth. I will start off with Mr. Hani. Sir, Arakchi made several direct statements regarding Tehran's position on nuclear talks, ranging from ongoing message exchanges with Washington to renewed cooperation with the IAEA. Does this signal, do you think, that Iran is now weighing diplomacy over confrontation?
Good afternoon. The Iranian statement following say that the parallelism of statements and diplomacy of confrontation, escalation adopted by the highest commander with other leaders and defense minister and other figures with escalative tendencies on the solid current. The other parallel is led by Arakchi, the foreign minister, which is an extension of the reform minister, and one Kharanji and other figures that trying to give room for diplomacy and political paths. Maybe both of the paths are complementary as long as they express the in agreement inside Iran, but its role dismantling, role distribution. And I see that the system with using threatening tone wants to escalating their targets and reducing compromise, but they know that escalating in advancement with expected military operations, especially toward Israel, or using stubbornness with the U.S. will cause losses to Iranian system regime, and this is not the best scenario within the economic situation, and also with number of sanctions revivement and also military losses Tehran experienced with a 12-day war, and also with the capacity of having long-standing confrontations. So,
okay, Dr. Fadi, Arakchi recently confirmed that Tehran is still communicating with Washington and expressed willingness to return to negotiations, but only under specific conditions. Does this suggest that the ball is now in the U.S. court to either pursue renewed nuclear talks or consider further action against Iran's nuclear facilities?
Yes, good morning, and thank you very much for having me. In my opinion, the ball is in both courts, the United States and Iran. From the United States perspective, at least for now, I can say that these messages from Iran about willingness to engage in diplomacy are very much read as strategic maneuver, actually. So what we can identify about the situation, the current situation at this time, is that there is much lack of confidence between the two sides. So the Iranians obviously don't trust the Americans. The Americans obviously don't trust the Iranians, and they think, as I mentioned, that they are trying to send messages of diplomacy to evade and avoid the sanctions, which are, as we know, from the snapback mechanism, are going to automatically be imposed in 30 days unless there is very clear engagement from Iran in collaboration with the IAEA. In other words, we can say that at this time, in my opinion, there are measures required from both sides. The Iranians have to be very flexible in engaging in diplomacy. The United States now, of course, after the 12-day war, we should think about new calibrated steps for the United States to engage with all these changes that happened after the war. So both parties are required to take measurable steps, and I believe that it's in both parties' court and not only the United States.
Yep. Okay, Mr. Hani, Arakchi confirmed ongoing message exchanges with the U.S. via intermediaries. What is Iran hoping to achieve through this back-channel diplomacy, do you think, in your opinion?
Yes, Iran suffered during the last period of isolation. U.S. avoiding or neglect confirmed that Washington didn't respond for about 15 Iranian message to reopen channels communication. That means that U.S. wants to impose pressure through neglect policy, lifting pressure, and with other tools, not only on by Washington but also using Troika state to use snapback, using the IAEA, and also different movements in the international community, with also imposing new sanctions from 3 weeks to 1 month. It's the first of its kind, and volume since 2018. All these mechanisms trying to uh, restricting Iran significantly within this atmosphere. I think they need Arakchi wants to open a channel to diplomacy and avoiding snapback and sanctions, and also trying to open channels of communication and postponing complications scenarios. And also there is an assumption of interference of Minister Badr Abdel Ati that may pave the way of Egypt's role in this matter. Also, therefore, Iranian side wants to find safe sides and save themselves on the political side and the military side, in order to avoid confrontations and avoid any Donald Trump's measures, and also so therefore they are trying to avoid risks.
Okay, Dr. Fadi, does Washington believe that the outcome of the 12-day war significantly shifts the context or the urgency of the nuclear negotiations?
Exactly. There is a very strong opinion here in Washington that the 12-day war has shifted both the context and the urgency.
Okay.
In Iran, for example, there has been a backlash from, of course, the Iranian public and the Iranian government, obviously, for those strikes which happened. And this resulted in a hardened stance within Tehran, of course, for the negotiations. At the same time, there has been new dynamics for urgency. In the United States, there are two opinions now. The first opinion, which was initially right after the 12-day war by the president, by Trump, saying that the nuclear program has obliterated, so there is no need for negotiations in the. But following up on, of course, intelligence reports, there is much clear tendency now that what happened to the nuclear stockpiles is now unknown, and there is a high possibility that these stockpiles have been taken, removed from one site to another. So there is now urgency to know about what happened to these enriched uranium stockpiles, whether they still exist, or have they been taken to new facilities. There is an understanding, of course, that inspection gaps raise proliferation risk. So without clear measures for inspection, there is a high possibility that Tehran is going back to proliferation. And this is why in Washington, there is a greater urgency now to re-establish mechanism and more contested, of course, political environment for bargaining. And in my understanding, if both sides don't return back soon to the negotiating table, we may possibly hear in Washington a more hardened, actually, rhetoric about military, possibly posture or something like this.
Well, Mr. Hani, Tehran insists that it will not return to talks under the same conditions as before. What has fundamentally changed in Iran's negotiating position?
Yes, of course, there is a lot of new considerations in the path of nuclear talks and negotiations. from conditions. There is new components for each side. Iranian upholds the enrichment right as the main component and red line. They cannot abandon. And also other considerations to the US side pushed by the Israel, which is eliminating Iranian nuclear program. European countries have other aspirations in regards to the ballistic missiles file and drones, especially in the interconnection of Iran nuclear power to Russian crisis and the support. And also there is mechanisms of safeguards. Previously, we talked about the safeguard of non of going off point from US or any other party. Now we are talking about sanctions, and there is an upholding of Iran to the non-military operations against Iran. So there is upgrades in the considerations. The other component is trust and the huge gap between two parties, not also the US and Tehran, but also Washington involvement in military operations against nuclear Iranian nuclear institutions, but also another sixth round which gives the green light to Israel. Now it's about other levels in regard to the EAEA and Rafael Grossi himself and Tehran is finding him complicit in providing intelligence information to the US and Israel, and he didn't use the nuclear security rules according to the IAEA towards the 12-day war. Also, there is voices inside Iran calling for his assassination, restraining him and not allowing inspections inside Iran. This is a lot of different complications on different levels and different and various levels has become more complicated even more than before, especially that door the destiny of 408 enriched uranium destiny and also their ability to enrich uranium 20% more than before. All of their indexes indicates a gap between all parties.
Dr. Fadi, Iran insists that sanctions, relief and mutual respect are prerequisites for returning to the negotiating table. Do you think the U.S. is prepared to consider a phased approach to easing sanctions as maybe a confidence-building measure, or none of that is actually existent?
In my opinion, this phased approach is technically feasible, and it's the one which we can think about the only realistic route to building confidence between the two sides. Obviously, we need confidence-building measures before we go to the negotiations. But in my opinion, again, I think at this time it's very unrealistic to think about even some kind of sanction relief unless there is a clear indication that the Iranians are willing to negotiate and are willing to be flexible in the negotiation regarding their nuclear program. Let's remember that the two sides don't trust each other. As I mentioned in my previous comment, there is lack of trust. So at this time, any indication that Washington is going to provide some sanction relief to Tehran is going to be met with internal domestic political backlash from some lawmakers in the Congress. Because let's remember that Donald Trump is the one who withdrew from the 2015 JCPOA. So if the administration suddenly decides that they want to provide sanction relief to Tehran without, as I mentioned, indications that Iran is willing to provide some flexibility in the negotiations, give something in return, this is not going to happen. The last report, as we remember, before the 12-day war, mentioned that Iran reached with its 400 kilograms, 900 pounds of enriched uranium, 60% of enriched uranium, which means they are very close to the nuclear threshold for having an atomic bomb. which means that something quick has to take action here. And obviously, it's not going to be through providing sanction relief to Tehran.
Mr. Haney, can you share with us why is Iran still willing to continue dialogue with European countries, even though, despite the recent European move to trigger the snapback mechanism?
Yes, because Iran has no other solution. Also, talking about snapback means that European countries put its hand on the trigger, but the bullet is not out yet. There is still room. There is hoping. But there's still 3 days able to move things, to have opportunity to diplomacy, mediation, and negotiations, and an ability to reach an agreement. Troika countries' pressure is to intensifying unprecedented pressure on Iran to try to drain it and to confuse that, to be able to have a compromise and some gains. Despite the difficulty and the tension, there is no other way but for diplomacy path and an attempt to stop this complication and its consequences, because European countries have own concerns of implementing these sanctions, so they are keen also on having the political and diplomatic solution, but there is no other solution but to the maximum pressure on Iran. Therefore, Iran will try to use two mechanisms: threatening and using escalative measures, as what the Revolutionary Guard doing in North Iran. The statement of Defense Minister Aziz Zada on establishing infrastructure and missiles in infrastructure abroad, and also moving some militias like Houthis in Red Sea, attempt to regain their leverage in on Lebanon and Syria and Iraq, which justifies Ali Al-Qarjani tour inside the area. But they are in a weakened position, not as before. There is scenarios way stronger on political and economic level, so they are demanded to avoid all of these scenarios and knock all the doors till the end and maintain the right of enrichment, so it will not compromise unless the price is losing the regime. So they will stand till the last breath.
Dr. Fadi, despite the continued indirect communication, mistrust, and everything that's between the U.S. and Iran, do you think the window for diplomacy has narrowed permanently, or do you think there's still a viable opportunity to reach a new agreement?
Yes, I would agree. It narrowed actually significantly. It has been narrowed, but I still think it's open. It has not been permanently closed. Okay. But in the very near future, I don't think there will be much breakthrough between the two sides.
Then what do you think? What do you think is going to happen, in your opinion?
So
what
at least
the next scenario?
The next scenario is that both sides are going to try to buy time. Iran is going to try to provide some flexibility in inspection measurements, and it will provide possibly the IAEA with some flexibility in coming to Tehran's sites and inspecting.
For inspection.
To buy some time. The United States as well is at this time very busy in trying to resolve the war in Gaza and what's going on in Ukraine. But still, it's weighing both diplomacy and military posture. So at this time, I think the two sides will try to buy time. In the United States, there is a very strong opinion that Iran's stance is not going to change unless there is significant change in the leadership. And in the indication here is always to the supreme leader. Washington believe that unless there is major change in the Iranian regime, referring to the supreme leader, we are not, at least in the very near future, going to see any flexibility in Iran's stance. And this is why I think, as I mentioned, it's narrow, not permanently closed, but I think both sides at this time are going to try to buy some time before they go to hopefully not a face-to-face military confrontation.
Mr. Hani, how does the Tehran view the recent progress with the IAEA? Does this signal, do you think, readiness for broader international cooperation?
For sure, the measures from the IAE and the relation to Tehran confirms the tension unprecedentedly on higher levels. Iran wants the not allowing IAE of inspection one more time, especially they are sure that the IAE wants to confirm the destiny of enriched uranium in the targeted points, and it will not respond in this matter. It announced the reduction of enrichment and other measures to retrust, to gain the trust, but there is a gap, and so they have to either reform this trust by mutual reforms, but Iran will not initiate unless they agree on different files. So the mediation is important. Positive impact or a role from the IAEA have to be approved by Iran, but the problem is that this file is not technical as it's political, essentially, because this is a very important when it's have to IAE, where IAEA relation to the to Iran. It has political pushes on them and pressure. This is why Iran is concerned from them. But there is no other solution but technical solution and an ability to inspect with the rules and terms agreed on. This is the mediator's role in the upcoming period to avoid escalation with very dire consequences on the region and the area mainly.
Dr. Fadi, given the recent Israeli and U.S. strikes on the Iranian nuclear sites, how does the Trump administration weigh military pressure versus diplomatic engagement going forward?
So far, the administration is weighing both options. And what we can say about the U.S. Policy so far towards Iran is some sort of coercive diplomacy, if you will. So indicating that they are willing to engage in negotiations with Iran. Steve Witkoff has been sending these messages ever since. And at the same time, showing that military force is still an option. In other words, any kind of military action taken by the United States is going to be seen as kind of surgical, kind of trying to bring Iran back to the negotiation track. So the military option, as we know, the Trump administration has always referred to peace through force, and the understanding that you can show posture while doing negotiation is like, let's say, kind of a way the Trump administration has been doing business with different states and different approaches. Whether we are thinking about Russia, whether we are thinking even about like China and of course in the Indo-Pacific. So in other words, the two options remain on the table. But let's keep in mind that there is also an understanding in the United States that military action on its own is not going to be enough. There is intelligence reports. There are intelligence reports, as I mentioned, that indicate the unknown destiny for all the enriched uranium stockpiles. So unless there is, as they refer to here in Washington, boots on the ground that can go to these nuclear sites and inspect that indeed these nuclear capabilities have been obliterated, military action cannot get to this end. So you can inflict significant damage on the Iranian nuclear capabilities and the nuclear sites, but you cannot get full confidence that you are done with this program unless you speak to the people there,
Yep.
unless you have on the ground, and that is the track for diplomacy. So again,
Yes.
there is weighing both options.
And that was Dr. Fadi Hilani, the Senior Fellow of the National Council on the U.S.-Arab Relations, and Mr. Hani Suleiman, the Iranian affairs expert. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your insights today. And with that, I conclude today's episode of In Depth, and thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned for more updates on Q News.